Hello, this is our week 4 day 2 reflection video, and it's also going to preview what we're looking at tomorrow in day 3 on interpreting key features from graphs, specifically X and Y intercepts and slope. And I'm going to be demonstrating the 3 reads method again. We did this before with word problems, but we can actually use the 3 reads method as a way to help us pull out the important information and use good test taking strategies for when there's a graph, a real world graph, instead of just a real world word problem. So I'm going to start with the first read. The first read is you're just reading the stem and then you're looking at the graph and trying to get an idea of what it's about. So the first read, the graph below shows the gas left in a truck as it is driving on a trip. Which statement best describes the, and I left it blank because it could ask us which statement best describes the y-intercept, the x-intercept, or the slope. It could ask us any of those. And we're going to look at, I believe this time we're going to look at y-intercept. So I'll go ahead and write that in. During the lesson tomorrow, it'll look at also the slope and the x-intercept. But this time it'll be the y-intercept. Now we're also going to look at the graph and sort of get an idea of what this graph is about. And you don't have to highlight this. In fact, sometimes it can get a little bit too messy, but I like to highlight this when I'm just demonstrating. I highlight all the different labels. Like it says up here, the title, this is about driving a truck. So I know this graph is about driving a truck. And I see the y-intercept or the y-axis says fuel, and GAL means gallons. So those numbers represent how much fuel is in the truck. And then over here on the x-axis, it says time driven, and H means hours. So basically what's happening is it's measuring how much fuel is in the truck as you're driving on a trip. And we can see that going from left to right, it starts up here and then it's going down. That means that the fuel is going down or the fuel is decreasing because you're using it up as you're driving. So that's just sort of the general idea of what's happening in this graph. So it's a good idea to always sort of think about what's happening in the graph, just get a general idea before you move on. Okay, the second read is actually about doing what we call like a mind dump or a brain dump, where you label everything you need to know or everything that you know about this graph. Because even though you haven't really read the problem uh, fully through or looked at the answer choices, you still know a lot about this graph. Like I can pick out the x and the y intercepts, and I can look at the slope, and generally speaking. So I'm going to look at those 3 things. The y-intercept is where the line crosses the y-axis. So that's right here. I'm going to put that in blue. And I'm going to label that this is my y-intercept. Some people will go ahead and say like circle the number so that you remember that the number is 200. And some people will say circle the label. You can do that, or which those are both fine. You can actually write it in over here like this, 200, and write the label gallons so that you remember that it's talking about 200 gallons. I'm going to do the same thing for the x-intercept. The x-intercept is down where it touches the x-axis. So that's right there. And that is my x-intercept. And again, some people will go ahead and circle the numbers and circle the axis title, and you can do that, that's fine. Or you can just write it underneath what it is. This is 20, and that H means hours. And I've also seen some people kind of go like this so that you know what it's talking about, or shorten it up, draw the arrow like that, and do the same thing up at the top, sort of draw the arrow from the number down so that you get a better idea of what it's talking about. And then the last thing, the slope, like we said before, you start at the top and it's going down like that. Okay, so that means that that is a negative slope or a negative rate of change. So I'm going to write here that this is negative. And I'm going to write what it actually means for this situation. It means that the fuel is decreasing. or you could say it's going down because they're using it. So that just sort of gives you a general idea of everything that you know without getting like too ultra specific on it. But it's just a good way to get down the stuff that you know. That's the second read. The third read, we go back up to the top and we highlight the goal. So what are we trying to find? Which statement, and actually I'm going to do it in yellow. Which statement best describes a y-intercept? And once you do that, then you highlight the stuff on the graph that deals with that goal. I'm looking for the y-intercept, so I'm going to highlight just those parts. My y-intercept is 200 gallons. I'm going to go like this. So when I start to look at my answers should talk about that number, 200, and that it being gallons. And anything that doesn't talk about 200 gallons is not the right answer because I'm looking at what describes a y-intercept, and the y-intercept is 200 gallons. So this one says 20 gallons. Well, that's the wrong number. And besides that, we know 20 was with hours, so I'm going to mark it off. This one says 200 gallons, so okay for now. This one says 20 hours, but we're not talking about 20 hours. We're talking about 200 gallons. This one says 200 hours, which is sneaky. It's got the right number, but if you've done your labels, you need to remember that 200 was with gallons. So I can mark it off. It has the wrong label. And then E and F says the truck is using 10 gallons of gas every mile. Well, that might be true, but that's not the Y-intercept numbers. And then S says the truck is using 1 gallon of gas every 10 miles. Again, that might be true. I haven't looked at it, but it's not the Y-intercept. So the only thing that's got the correct number and label for my Y-intercept is B. And now I'm going to look at what B says more specifically. The truck started with 200 gallons of gas. And if I look up here at my graph, well, this Y-intercept is at the start. It's at the very beginning, how much gas was in the truck. So that is a true statement, and it describes the Y-intercept. The truck started with 200 gallons of gas. And that's how you can use the 3 reads method when you have a graph to help you pull out the important information, focus in on your goal, and then eliminate wrong answer choices either because they use the wrong number or the wrong label.